Hello and welcome back to Under One Roof. I'm Dr. Tom Simcock, your host, and today we have something special in store for you. We're excited to kick off our Festival of Social Sciences Special Edition season. In this season, we'll be delving into a variety of topics, each shedding light on how our homes influence our lifelong well-being. To get things started, we have an episode close to the hearts of many of our listeners. We're diving into the world of pets and their roles in our homes, our well-being, and our lives. In this episode, I'm going to be handing over the hosting duties to my colleague, Dr. Julie Ellis, a senior lecturer here at the University of Huddersfield. So, let's embark on this journey where we explore the bonds between our furry companions and the places we call home. It's going to be an incredible episode, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Under One Roof. I'm your host, Dr. Julie Ellis, and today we're diving into the topic of pets, renting and our homes. As we explore the vital role that pets play in our lives, we're joined by two fantastic guests today. So we've got our very own Dr. Tom Simcock and Barry Webb from Battersea Dogs Cats Home. So to kick things off, Barry, I'm going to come to you first. If you could just briefly introduce yourself and just tell our audience a little bit about the fantastic work that Battersea does supporting animals in need.
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm Barry, and I work in the policy and public affairs team at Battersea. That's the team that tackles some of the big animal welfare issues beyond our gates, as we like to say. So, tackling some of those problems at source, if you like, that create and that bring many of the dogs and cats into our home. So, for example, our campaigns have included improving the conditions in which dogs and cats are bred, requiring more breeders to be licensed. It's included looking at the sentencing for animal cruelty, where we managed to improve or increase the maximum sentence from 6 months, which was actually the lowest in Europe, to 5 years. Microchipping, where we've been raising the issue of the databases of microchipping to improve how the system works. And now currently, since 2018, actually, we've been looking at this issue of what we call pet-friendly properties, where we really want to increase the supply of properties in the rental sector that allow the tenants to keep pets. But that's just our work. I mean, the main operational work at Battersea, we deal with, or we help around about 5,000 dogs and cats a year who come into our home needing rehoming or reuniting or help in other ways. And we're very fortunate that our funders and people that give us money to do the things that we do have enabled us to create a state-of-the-art clinic for our dogs and rehabilitation facilities, including hydrotherapy. We provide advice and training for dog owners. So Battersea Dogs and Cats Home is a big operation, and we are keen to make sure that we improve the lot of dogs and cats generally, and not just those that come into our home.
Well, that's fantastic, Barry. I mean, as an animal lover myself, it's wonderful to hear some of the great work that's been happening at Battersea. So thank you ever so much for that. I'm just going to bob over to you now, Tom, and just ask you to say a little bit to our listeners and just tell them about the research that you've been kind of doing around housing and in relation to pets in particular.
Thank you, Julie. And it's great to appear on the other side of the microphone as well, instead of being in your position as host. I'm Tom Simcock. I'm a research fellow here at the University of Huddersfield and also a secretary of the Housing Studies Association. My work is sort of my background isn't really in housing. I've come from a psychology background, and my PhD was in organisational change in the fire service. I've sort of ended up in the housing sphere through my work with the Residential Landlords Association, looking at private landlords and understanding the private rented sector. And a lot of my work is focused on sort of landlords' attitudes and behaviours to a wide range of issues, from welfare reform to pets currently. And some of my past research has been involved in evidence reviews, looking at the meaning of home and why that's important as well, and how pets feature into that as well.
That's great, Tom. Again, it's really interesting stuff going on there. I know we're going to have a really exciting chat today. So I'm gonna move on a little bit and start asking you some further questions just to kind of unpack this a bit more. Then, so I'm going to pop back to you, Barry, and just wonder if you could tell our listeners a little bit about some of the common challenges that renters might face when it comes to having pets in their homes. So, have you come across any stories in particular about renters having to maybe give up their pets to due to the restrictions that are placed on them in the private rented sector? Any stories you could share with us?
Yeah, but the impetus, really, the reason why we began our campaign, our Pet Friendly Properties campaign, was the fact that we were seeing a lot of dogs now coming into the home, which were being given up by people who had to make the choice. Either, they have a roof over their head, or they give up their pet because many landlords weren't allowing them to keep their dog or cat. And actually, it was one of the main reasons that dogs and cats were actually coming into our home for rehoming. These are very distressing experiences for everybody. And that's when we realised that there was a big issue here. Why should people living in the private rented sector, or in the social rented sector indeed, be unfairly disenfranchised, if you like, from all the benefits that pets can give you, compared to people that live in the owner-occupied sector? It just wasn't fair. So we looked into this, and we've done a fair bit of research over the last few years in both the social and private rented sector. Clearly, there is a huge demand, as you'd expect, in the rented sector for people who want to own a pet. We found that about 70% of people living in the rented sector either own a pet or want to own a pet, and yet the supply just isn't there. And this leads to all sorts of distressing situations. For those that can or are allowed to keep a pet, it is both more costly and very stressful. It's costly because often they're required to pay higher deposits, security deposits, because landlords worry about potential damage caused by pets. They're often required to pay higher rents. They're often accept accommodation which is less desirable. It wasn't the accommodation they want, but they've had to take it because that's all that's on offer. And many, because they fear that they won't be allowed to keep a pet, hide their pet, to keep it secret from the landlord. And this results in them living very stressful lives because they're breaching their tenancy agreement, and so at risk of eviction. And these are, very difficult. So it makes life having a pet in the rented sector very difficult. For those that can't keep a pet or not allowed, there are those that who don't already have a pet, not allowed to, completely disenfranchised from all the benefits that the pet can give. And we know from our research that about 60% of people living in rented accommodation where pets aren't allowed want a pet and are not allowed to. So they are frustrated, if you like, from not being able to have all the benefits of having a dog or cat. But the most distressing, of course, situations is, as I mentioned right at the beginning, those that ultimately have to give up their pet. And this is quite a problem. For example, I can give you one story.
Yes, please do.
Of a lady who rents in London, she had previously owned a rescue dog in her flat with her landlord's consent, but the dog passed away, sadly, and it was a very difficult time for her, as you can imagine, when your pet dies after 12 years. And she also suffered from a clinical depression condition. Having a pet helps her a great deal in managing that condition. So she, of course, at some point wanted to get another dog to replace the one that she'd adopted earlier. And she did manage to get another dog. But apparently after 2 weeks of having the dog, the landlord told her that she wasn't allowed to have another dog in her property, despite having had one previously and having proved that she could keep one responsibly. And she was told that if she didn't get rid of the dog, that tenancy would be terminated and she would be evicted. She was at risk of losing her home and was forced to give up the dog to us for rehoming, which fortunately we were able to do very quickly. So reducing the amount of stress on the dog. But for that particular lady, it's an extremely distressing situation. She's still looking for a home which will enable her to keep a pet. So that's just one example, if you like, of not only what happens when you're not allowed to keep a pet, but the very uncertain situation people find themselves in. She was in a flat where she'd previously been allowed to keep a dog, and then the landlord changed their mind. This illustrates, if you like, the very stressful circumstances that people find themselves in.
Absolutely, Barry. The word precarious sort of comes to mind. I
Indeed.
think you've kind of conveyed that really powerfully for us, some of the impacts that renters, upon them, this, of having to manage this stress. And because as we know, and Tom will be able to say more, I'm sure that there's lots of research evidence that shows that pets, are absolutely beneficial for our well-being. And so, having to give up that dog must have been extremely difficult. So
Extremely.
Thank you.
And the reason it's not just landlords banning pets that prevents people from getting them. It is actually the uncertainty as well. So we know of stories where people want a pet and might be allowed to keep one, but don't, because they just worry that at any point they might have to make that decision to give up their pet because the landlord's changed their mind.
Sure, absolutely. And so on the landlords then, if I can just sort of pop to you, Tom, and just sort of get your perspective and maybe some of the barriers that are in place that stop landlords from renting to pet owners, then if you can just give us a bit more of an idea of some of those, please.
Yes, certainly, Julie. I think in terms of the barriers, I think one of the main things is around perceptions of risk, of whether the pet is likely to cause more damage or not. And also potential past experience, that a landlord, if they've had a past experience where maybe there has been damage or there's been an issue, that they might then decide for future tenancies that they might then go, no, I'm not going to rent out to a pet or other certain situations as well. We know from welfare reform that landlords where they've had experiences of issues with tenants who claim universal credit or benefits as well, they then go, I don't want to deal with that system, so I'm going to move away from that. And there's great research from Sheffield Hallam. I think it was a report called Access to Housing for the Under 35s that demonstrated the impact of landlords moving away from young people as well because of welfare reform. So there's this issue around landlords' perceptions of issues and how that can affect their decisions on who to let to. Then there's also work and issues around unintended consequences of the deposit cap that was brought in England. So that was, I think, 2018, I think it was. Came in an attempt to stop letting agents and landlords charging rip-off deposits on properties. And that limited it to a 6-week deposit cap. But that has meant that some landlords who used to allow pets and would charge a pet deposit on top of a 6-week deposit have then gone, well, I don't want that risk if I'm not able to address that in full. So there's that unintended consequence of the current legislation, which is where some of the newer potential legislation is sort of trying to address that. And we're doing some work with Battersea right now just to look into those perceptions of sort of landlord risk and experiences to identify whether damages do occur and to what proportion and what level of financial risk that means for landlords as well. So it's mostly around financial or perceptions of financial risk as some of those barriers there.
That'd be great. And to know what comes out of that research as well, I think will help us, like you say, just know a little bit more about things from the landlord's perceptions and their side of things. And just to kind of ask a question then, we've mentioned dogs, and I think we might have mentioned cats, but does it tend to be any pets then? You know, if a landlord says no pets, are we talking hamsters, spiders? Are we talking a lot? Do you have any sense of how that usually works out in practice?
I think it all depends on the type of animal, but I think it can be easy to say no to dogs and cats because they're not usually in a crate or a cage. You know, if you've got a rabbit, that could be outside in the garden. But I have heard of circumstances where landlords have said no to them. I do know of other circumstances where landlords have said yes to tortoises and other animals as well. It's...
We're back to that kind of state of like uncertainty, aren't we? And, not being quite sure. And absolutely. Great. And I suppose if I just kind of want to ask a question more broadly again to you, Tom, just thinking about homes then, because obviously a house, it's bricks, it's mortar, it's a shelter. We need it for our kind of physical health, and we know about the problems associated with being in a cold home or an inadequate home physically. We're just thinking more about maybe the psychological, the social cultural meanings of home then. Could you just say a little bit about home as a concept, I guess, something that's important to us as people, and then maybe just connect that a little bit with why pets then, where they fit within that understanding of home?
Well, I think what you said there about, it's more than just bricks and mortars or a roof over our heads is really important. I think it's also important to just say that the concept of home means different things to different people. So there is this cultural and social element to it. But throughout all the sort of research, if we try and synthesize that all together, are sort of several core elements that can turn a place into a home. So it's a place that's it's a comfortable space that's a haven from stress. It's a place to socialize and be a source of social status. It's somewhere that offers autonomy and independence, but also somewhere that provides a sense of stability, security, and control, and also somewhere that provides a sense of belonging as well. If you think about, people growing older in properties, thinking about, the memories around, if they've had children or if, they've had a pet, about those memories associated with that place. And then coming on to why pets are important. It's about that, I think, that idea of stability and control in the property. And, we're talking about that uncertainty around landlords not allowing pets, or they're not sure if the landlord will allow it or change their mind. There's legislation currently in place called within the Housing Act around Section 21. So that Section 21 allows the landlord to give notice to the tenant for 2 months' notice for them to leave the property, and no reason is ever needed for that to be given. And then after that 2 months, if the tenant hasn't left, the landlord can apply to the court for a court order. And if the landlord's done everything right, the court has to give possession of the property back to the landlord. And then the tenant's also in breach and would have to pay the landlord as well for their court costs. So that legislation there creates this instability in general. And there's some really sort of excellent research that's come out recently. I don't know if you've seen it in the news, but it's from Dr. Amy Clare and Professor Emma Baker at University of Adelaide and University of, I think it's Sussex. And it's shown that the insecurity in private renting is related to greater epigenetic aging. So your genes itself are aging because of your housing circumstance and the insecurity around there. And other work by Dr. Amy Clare previously has found that private renting and insecurity is linked to, I think it's higher levels of C-reactive protein biomarkers, which is indicative of higher levels of chronic stress and chronic inflammation. So it's this sort of link between our, the psychological aspects of, that insecurity, that uncertainty, along with the biological, physical impacts as well that it can have on our health. So bringing that together, having that security and control over our homes is really key in terms of our homes as a place of security, place of safety, and a place of belonging.
Oh, and I guess as we're talking today, the place of pets within that, if that adds even more uncertainty to that situation and stress, and those really interesting things you said about the intersection between biological and social influences, will become even more prevalent. So that's really interesting stuff, Tom. Thank you. We mentioned, we've talked a little bit about reform and policy and things like that. And I guess I just want to ask a couple of questions about that, just to learn a little bit more about the Renters Reform Bill. So I'm going to come back to you, Barry, if that's okay, and just ask you to look forward a little bit and to maybe just talk a bit about how you foresee that the Renters Reform Bill shaping the landscape for both landlords and private renters. Are there specific provisions or changes within that bill that you think are going to have any sort of substantial impact? What's your feelings?
There is a proposal within the bill which we welcome and which we've been calling for a while now, and actually which some years ago the Office of Fair Trading said also should happen, and that is that landlords will no longer be able to blanket ban pets without any good reason. So the bill includes a provision for tenants who have the right to request in writing to be able to keep a pet, and landlords have to reply within a specified time. I think it's 28 days. In writing, they have to reply and will be unable to refuse that request unreasonably. So landlords have to think carefully, and if they object to it, they have to object on reasonable grounds. The bill also includes the provision that landlords will be able to require tenants to take out insurance against any damage that pets may cause to the property, which is again something that we're looking into. We know from our research that that provision, if landlords are able to require tenants to take out insurance, will enable many more landlords to accept tenants with pets. So these are both welcome and potentially very promising interventions, which we are keen to see. Importantly, it sends a message, I think, to landlords that they must treat requests to keep a pet fairly and reasonably, and cannot just ban a pet with no just reason. This, of course, raises all sorts of questions. There's a lot of detail to work through here. For example, what would be a reasonable refusal and what would be unreasonable needs to be defined. And we also know that the market, the pet insurance market, is very limited at the moment. And that's something that needs to be looked into. there needs to be. We'd like to see the pet insurance market expand and offer many more products. So a lot of detail to work through, but it's a good start, and we hope that bill will see the light of day and be enacted.
Okay, so maybe cautiously optimistic then about some of the potential changes that might come.
Indeed, yes. I mean, legislation is important, but it's not the only thing that needs to happen. It's not a panacea. And we know that just changing the law is not enough to change behaviour.
Okay, thanks, Barry. And sticking with the bill, Tom, I just wondered if you'd got any reflections on its maybe broader implications. What's your thoughts on its likely overall impact on well-being for renters in that sector?
Yeah, certainly. And I think one of the flagship parts of the bill is about the removal of Section 21 notices. So removing that a 2-month notice period for eviction. So hopefully that will then provide renters with a lot more security and certainty over their property, that they'll know. And I think another key thing about the bill is that it removes fixed term tenancies. So it'll be a continuous rolling contract, which is similar to what they've introduced in Scotland. So hopefully that provides renters with this more longer term thinking of that they'll be able to be in that property if they wish to. They don't have to if they don't want to, but there is that potential there for that longer term security. And I think that doesn't hamper landlords either, because part of the bill is they're trying to see it as a sort of a balancing act, and they are giving landlords greater rights for regaining possession of the property. So if they want to move into the property, if they previously lived there, or if they want to sell the property, there's these new rights for them to regain possession. Of course, there are some potential loopholes, and then as the legislation hopefully progresses over the next few months, we'll be able to see how that sort of pans out in terms of the potential for any unintended consequences. But at the moment, there is, I think, positive optimism that it will be a new step forward for the private rented sector in terms of providing that greater security. And I was talking earlier about, the potential impact of people not being able to settle down in the communities, not feeling able to make a home in the property because of, the insecurity of the tenure. Having this new bill, these new rights, hopefully produces greater security, which then hopefully addresses, improves their psychological well-being and also then the physical well-being as well.
All right. So again, so fingers crossed that some good progress might be made there. I'm mindful that we will have people tuning in, I'm sure, who are pet lovers, pet owners, and people that are perhaps in this position or maybe currently looking for somewhere where they might be able to rent with pets. And I just wondered if Barry'd got any thoughts, kind of regardless of the bill and the policy side of things, is the things that you think that pet owners can do that can help them to find homes that might be suitable for them to rent? Would you have any sort of thoughts or advice, Barry?
My advice for people is to go to our website. On Battersea's website, there's lots of advice for tenants who want to keep a pet and how to go about doing that in the rented sector. For example, there is a section on the website which tells tenants what their legal rights are. A lot of tenants don't understand what they are and aren't able to do in relation to pets, and it's important that they understand that. And these rights are obviously likely to change if the Renters Reform Bill goes through, which gives tenants even more rights, which is very important they understand what they are. I think also it's important that tenants think through, as we would say in any case, whether a pet is right for them in their situation, their circumstances, and what kind of pet would suit their situation. We would always say, do your research, and given the situation you're in, think very carefully about whether you can give a dog or cat a good home. And it's important that we do that. We're not expecting or asking landlords to approve any pet in any situation. And it's important to say that. We do understand that, it's important that, the pet fits the situation. So if you go to our website, it'll tell you, for example, how to search for a property where pets are considered. It will advise you on how to approach the landlord and how to go about requesting permission to keep a pet. For example, we would always advise go direct to the landlord rather than the letting agent. Landlords are often much more open to discussion about a pet, much more persuadable. And we give some advice on what to say, for example, how you might do that. For example, going about providing evidence that you are a responsible dog owner, getting references, and so on, all of which helps to reassure a landlord that it's all going to be okay. So we have some template letters and forms and so on that people can use to help them through that process. So my advice is, as I say, go to our website where they'll find a lot of, I think, helpful material.
Brilliant, Barry. Thank you. Yeah, so really good advice there. So check out Battersea's website if you find yourself in that position or you're wanting some kind of, some tips, some advice. Sounds like there's some really good resources there. And I guess I've just come lastly to you, Tom, and just to ask you, again, from the landlord's perspective, is there more that they can do in terms of, considering pet owners as potential renters? What might they maybe be able to do to help?
I think just from the very start, it's being open to the, as Barry said, not every situation is potentially going to be the right situation. Depending on the type of property, if it's what we call a house of multiple occupancy, HMO, if we've got 8 or 9 people sharing, in there, and someone wants to have 10 dogs or something that in a room, that might not be quite appropriate. But I think it's being open to the situation and making sure that the landlord, being open, finding out from the tenant what the situation is, what type of pet that they're requesting, and I think thinking about the potential benefits it might have. Well, if that tenant has a pet, are they able to feel at home in the property? And if the tenant feels at home in the property, are they going to want to stay in the property for longer? Or if you say no, are they going to stay for 6, 12 months until they can find another property that they can find an actual property that they can rent a pet with, and they're allowed? Which then means for you as that landlord, you then have increased costs because you've got to re-let that property down the line. But then there's also other broader benefits as well in terms of allowing pets, and there might be occasional damage, but then there is that deposit that's accessible. And I think it's all about having clear and open communication with the tenant going forward. And I think that accounts for not just pets, but all aspects of renting as well. I think that's where a lot of things fall down, is that communication between landlords and the renter.
Sure. So really, really interesting to get that perspective. And they say that idea that actually having a tenant with pets may bring benefits that some landlords might not have thought about. So yeah, really interesting perspective, Tom. Thank you. And thank you to Barry as well, to both of you for a really, really enjoyable conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. So thank you. And so as we come to the end of what I think has been a great episode, I just want to take a moment to reflect on some of the kind of profound stuff we've said in the conversation today. So we've explored the way, that the world of housing, pets and well-being, how they're all intertwined and have this quite, important, significant impact on people and on our day-to-day lives. And I think, this discussion, it resonates deeply within this broader context of, thinking about lifelong well-being, which is, obviously a really important thing for us to be thinking about. And so our homes and the companions that we have in them, whether it's a little hamster, a dog, a cat, whatever your chosen pet, they play think, a pivotal role in shaping quality of life, happiness, and as Tom mentioned before, that sense of belonging. A home is more than bricks and mortar. And I think it's been really interesting today to hear how our pets are part of making a house into a home. And so we've shared stories and insights that have helped us to gain and reaffirm, this idea that housing is more, as I said, than just bricks and mortar. It's a sanctuary that relates very much to our well-being. So again, I just want to say thank you to our excellent guests, Tom Simcock and Barry Webb from Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, for their really interesting contributions today. And as I conclude and bring the podcast to an end, I just want to encourage you, our listeners, to join us, be part of this conversation, part of the dialogue. Please do share your stories and insights and experiences about the roles of your pets and what they mean in your life and for your home in particular. So thank you ever so much for joining us on this podcast series, where we'll keep going, we'll keep exploring these threads that tie housing and health together. So thank you for listening.
And that brings us to the end of this episode on pets, homes and well-being. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration as much as we have, but there's more to come. In our next episode, we'll dive into another crucial topic, the housing challenges faced by refugees. So stay tuned for that inspiring journey. As we continue our Festival of Social Sciences Special Edition season, we invite you to be a part of the dialogue. Share your thoughts, stories and experiences with us. You can connect with us on our social media channels, follow us on Spotify or your favourite podcast platform, and keep the conversation going. And don't forget to participate in our short survey. Your feedback helps us create content that truly resonates with you. The survey link can be found in our episode description. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back for our next episode. Until then, take care, stay curious, and keep exploring the profound connections between housing and well-being with us on Under One Roof.